That's not what it says. The words sliced through the air like a bullet. Conversation died. Crystal glasses hovered untouched. Every face around the massive dining table turned, some curious, some confused, some furious. The voice didn't come from a lawyer, not a board member, not a translator, not a stakeholder. It came from the corner of the room where the help stands. Kendra Vance stood still, her right hand clutching a silver tray of unopened wine bottles. Her posture perfect, her eyes locked on the sleek folder of documents that had just been passed to the Japanese guest of honor, the folder that held a $500 million deal, the folder that held a lie. And she had just exposed it. Kendra wasn't supposed to speak. She knew that. Everyone knew that. She was there to serve silently, swiftly, invisibly. But when your grandfather teaches you a language most people don't expect you to know, and your mother raises you to never stay quiet when something feels wrong, you don't just stand there, you say it, even when it's going to shake the room to its foundation. You said the translation was identical, she added, her voice steady, but not loud. But the Japanese version says something else, something dangerous. Across the table sat Harlan Slade, America's favorite finance mogul. Sharp jaw, silk suit, teeth like white gold. He laughed for magazine covers and got invited to speak at Ivy League schools. The man had power, money, and charm. But what he didn't have in that moment was control, because a waitress had just dismantled him with a sentence. And this wasn't just a corporate scandal waiting to happen. This was a black story, one about silence, truth, and the strength of someone the world thought would never speak up. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in justice that doesn't wear a tie, stick around, hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always powerful to see how far the truth travels. Because tonight, in a room full of money and arrogance, one young black woman reminded the world that integrity doesn't need an invitation. Let's take it from the top. This is how it happened. Kendra Vance was used to being underestimated. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads, smooth brown skin, warm almond eyes, a graceful walk that made her movements feel like poetry. But in the white tablecloth world of high-end dining, all they saw was a uniform. All they heard was silence. She worked at Velvet Ivy, a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan, where meals cost rent money and smiles were polished to perfection. The kind of place where celebrities dined without being bothered, where deals were whispered over Wagyu beef, and where someone like Kendra was expected to be helpful, invisible, and absolutely replaceable. She learned quickly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Keep your tone friendly, but not familiar. If a guest says something rude, laugh it off. If they call you girl instead of your name, let it slide. When a man in a $3,000 suit snaps his fingers at you, smile like it's a compliment. And the compliments came dressed like daggers. You're so well-spoken, one guest had said, clearly surprised. You have such nice features for a black girl, another whispered as if it were a favor. One night, a tech bro from Silicon Valley leaned in and said, "You'd be perfect for a music video. Ever consider modeling?" Kendra had smiled, nodded, and walked away. Every time. But she remembered. She remembered the way their eyes flicked over her, like she was a character they had already written. Not someone smart, or sharp, or multilingual. Not someone with a college degree and a gift for language, just a pretty face in a world that saw color before character. They didn't know she spoke Japanese fluently. They didn't know her grandfather had served in World War II and taught her the language as a way to honor the people he once fought against. He used to tell her, understanding another man's language is how you truly understand his heart. She had studied quietly, privately, with books, podcasts, old military letters. Not for a job, not for show, for herself. So no, Kendra wasn't just the help, and the world was about to find that out. Because when the truth finally cracks the surface, it usually comes from the place you least expect. And on that night, it came from the girl in the white apron holding a tray of wine, the one they all forgot to fear. Harlan Slade did not walk into a room. He conquered it. At least that's what he believed. And for the most part, the world let him. Tonight was no different. The private dining hall at Velvet Ivy had been cleared for a special event. One long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, white orchids in tall vases, everything curated right down to the jazz trio in the corner, playing just loud enough to be impressive, but not loud enough to interrupt a deal. Slade entered with his entourage, 2 lawyers, 1 translator, and his executive assistant, who never looked up from her iPad. He wore a navy custom suit that probably cost more than Kendra's entire annual rent. His tie was red, always red, power color, sharp, deliberate, calculated. He was the kind of man who smiled only when he knew he was winning. To the world, Harlan Slade was a success story. Ivy League graduate, Forbes, 30 under 30, self-made billionaire in fintech. A media darling with a trademark smirk and a Rolodex full of senators and CEOs. But behind closed doors, he was a different man, colder, sharper, hungrier. Kendra had seen him a few times before at the restaurant. He never remembered her. He never used names, just snapped his fingers and said things like sparkling water, room temperature, not cold. Tonight he was hosting Akira Tanaka, a quiet, reserved billionaire from Japan, whose family's holding company controlled a vast network of logistics, real estate, and tech. A man with more legacy than flash. Slade wanted his money. The plan was simple: charm Tanaka, translate the contract, close the deal, and walk away with a $500 million injection into Slade Capital's new Asia expansion. Everything had to go perfectly. The staff had been prepped for weeks. No slip-ups, no noise, no interruptions. Kendra had been handpicked to serve wine and remain in the background. She had accepted without question. Extra hours meant extra tips, and her mother's medical bills were piling up. What Slade didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tonight the silence he demanded would finally speak back. Because in all his preparations, in all his arrogance, Harlan Slade forgot one simple thing. When you treat people like they don't matter, eventually one of them reminds you that they do. For Harlan Slade, the $500 million deal wasn't about money. It was about legacy. He had already built a fortune. He had the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the private jet with custom leather seats, the $10,000 suits tailored in Italy. He didn't need more cash. What he wanted was something else: respect. The kind of respect that only comes when your name is carved into the foundation of global finance. And for that, he needed Japan. Slade Capital had been struggling to break into the Asian market. Regulations were tight. Trust was slow. Competitors were fierce. But if he could bring Tanaka Holdings under his wing, he wouldn't just enter the market. He would own it. The only problem, Tanaka was cautious. He had built his empire slowly, methodically, over decades. He didn't believe in fast money or big promises. His lawyers wanted dual language contracts reviewed, line by line, everything transparent, everything equal. So Slade did what he always did when faced with a roadblock. He found a shortcut. He hired a freelance translator, someone quiet, someone desperate, someone willing. The instructions were simple. Make the English version sound vague and open-ended, while the Japanese version locked in hard guarantees that favored Slade Capital in any downturn. Specifically, if the Asian market dropped more than 5%, even for reasons unrelated to their venture. Slade would gain temporary administrative control over Tanaka's US-based assets. Temporary, of course, was never defined. Control, however, was. It was legal sleight of hand, just enough ambiguity to slide past the American lawyers, just enough precision to trap Tanaka. Slade paid the translator a bonus, $20,000 in cash. It's just protective language. He said he'll never read it. They trust the English version anyway. The documents were printed on thick ivory paper, bound in leather, weighted, professional, impressive. Slade had them delivered to the restaurant that afternoon. He would present them after dessert. The contract was the final course in a carefully choreographed performance. What he didn't count on, what he never imagined, was that the one person who would actually read the Japanese version would be the server bringing the wine. And she wouldn't just read it. She would understand it fluently. And she would know instantly that this wasn't a business deal. It was a setup, a trap, a betrayal disguised in ink and politeness. And she would say the one thing he never expected to hear. That's not what it says. The evening had been polished to perfection until the moment cracked. Kendra moved with the grace of someone who had mastered invisibility. She floated between tables, refilling glasses, responding to subtle nods, and anticipating every need before a word was spoken. She had done this 100 times, 1,000. She had learned how to disappear in plain sight. But some people never let you forget who they think you are.
Discrimination in your courtroom. The gavel fell from Voss's hand, hitting the bench with a dull thud that echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. Within hours, the county courthouse transformed into a hive of urgent activity. In the main courtroom, Chief Judge Vivian Moreau presided over an emergency hearing regarding Talia's case. Her demeanor contrasted sharply with Voss's, attentive, measured, and genuinely concerned. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Moreau announced, "This court dismisses all charges against Talia Brooks with prejudice. The record will show these charges were without merit and improperly pursued." Victor Langford, owner of the Grand Hotel, sat uncomfortably in the gallery. After the hearing, he approached Talia and her father. "Miss Brooks, I want to personally apologize," he said, extending his hand. "I spoke without full knowledge of the situation and contributed to this injustice. After learning about your research, I'd like to offer you an internship in our corporate social responsibility department. Your perspective would be invaluable." "This is a witch hunt," he sputtered. "I've served on this bench for 20 years. "Yes," Morrison agreed. "And during those 20 years, you've demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory behavior that undermines the fundamental principle of equal justice under law." Across town at the Judicial Ethics Committee headquarters, Director Morrison and her team began the monumental task of reviewing Voss's case history. Analysts pulled digital records while others compiled physical documentation dating back years. "The pattern is even clearer than we suspected," Morrison told her deputy, scrolling through a data visualization on her screen. "Minority defendants received sentences averaging 60% longer than white defendants for identical charges. We need to file motions for reconsideration. First-time white offenders received probation at 7 times the rate of minority offenders." A junior analyst entered with another report. "Director, we've identified 23 cases with particularly egregious sentencing disparities. 3 defendants are still incarcerated despite circumstances nearly identical to white defendants who received probation." Morrison nodded grimly. "Flag those for immediate review. Contact the public defender's office." Legal experts appeared on news panels discussing the broader implications. "What happened today represents both a failure and a success." Professor Elena Montgomery, a judicial ethics expert explained during a primetime interview. The failure is that a judge was allowed to demonstrate bias for years without consequence. The success is that finally, through the diligence of a remarkable young woman and proper oversight, accountability arrived. Her research, combined with the Ethics Committee's findings, provided compelling evidence for legislative action. State Senator Whitaker announced plans to introduce the Judicial Accountability Act the following week. Talia received an invitation to speak at the press conference announcing the bill. Ms. Brooks's meticulous documentation provided the evidence we've needed, Whitaker told reporters. Talia found herself thrust into an unexpected spokesperson role. At a hastily arranged press conference, she stood beside Dr. Blake, composed despite the forest of microphones before her. My research wasn't about targeting any individual, she explained carefully. It was about documenting patterns that affect real people's lives every day. One biased judge can impact thousands of families over a career. The media descended with predictable hunger. Initial headlines focused on the sensational. Teen turns tables on biased judge, and student researcher exposes courthouse corruption. Television crews camped outside the courthouse, competing for interviews with anyone connected to the case. By evening, more thoughtful coverage emerged. The State Tribune published an in-depth analysis titled Systemic Bias, When Those Who Judge Are Not Judged. His dismissal was immediate. Aki's dismissal was as a dismissal, accompanied by a company-wide directive on the hotel's inclusion initiatives and non-discrimination policies. At the Grand Hotel's corporate headquarters, executives launched an internal investigation into how the miscommunication occurred. They discovered that Victor Langford's executive assistant, Gregory Palmer, deliberately failed to inform him about educational programs using their facilities. I didn't think those kinds of events belonged at our establishment, Palmer admitted during his termination interview. They don't generate revenue and attract the wrong element. Voss retreated to his Westlake mansion, doors locked against the media camped outside. He hired Julian Kraft, a high-profile defense attorney known for representing disgraced public officials. Judge Voss's comments have been taken out of context, Kraft told reporters from Voss's driveway. His distinguished career speaks for itself. We are confident that a full and fair review will exonerate him from these politically motivated accusations. The statement backfired when the Ethics Committee released transcripts of Voss's courtroom remarks from multiple cases, revealing a consistent pattern of condescension and bias toward minority defendants. Even his political allies began distancing themselves, their statements evolving from strong support to waiting for all the facts. This legislation will establish independent review of sentencing patterns, mandatory bias training, and a more transparent process for judicial appointments. Governor Whitaker addressed the situation during a scheduled press conference. The integrity of our justice system depends on fairness and impartiality from every judge in every courtroom. My administration takes these allegations extremely seriously. We will follow the Ethics Committee's investigation closely and take appropriate action based on their findings. The State Bar Association announced its own investigation into potential ethics violations by Voss. Judicial misconduct of this nature, if confirmed, represents a serious breach of professional ethics, their statement read. The Bar Association is committed to maintaining the highest standards of legal practice, including on the bench. Former defendants from Voss's court began coming forward with their stories. Community legal aid organizations established a hotline for those who believed they had received biased treatment. Within days, they recorded over 200 calls. Pierce's law firm, Marshall & Reed, announced they would provide pro bono representation for appeals in the most egregious cases. Equal justice isn't just an ideal, Pierce told the press. It's a constitutional guarantee that must be enforced. Talia returned to school the following Monday. attempting to resume normal life despite her newfound recognition. Classmates and teachers regarded her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Her history teacher asked her to speak to the class about civic engagement and the justice system. "Sometimes change starts with simply paying attention," she told her peers. "Documenting what you see, speaking up when something isn't right." As the second week of investigations began, a forensic audit of Voss's communications revealed something even more damning. Emails between Voss and certain prosecutors showed coordination to target specific types of defendants, with explicit discussion of maintaining deterrent sentencing in problem communities. The Ethics Committee immediately forwarded these communications to the State Attorney General's office, transforming the case from professional misconduct to potential criminal conspiracy. Gone was Voss's imperious stride and confident smirk. He took his seat at the respondents' table with uncharacteristic meekness, eyes downcast. The irony escaped no one. The judge, now judged, sitting exactly where countless defendants once trembled before him. Director Morrison presented the Ethics Committee's findings first. Evidence mounted in methodical, devastating sequence. Statistical analysis of Voss's sentencing patterns, testimony from former defendants, court transcripts revealing disparate treatment, and the damning private communications. The State Judicial Center's largest hearing room reached capacity an hour before proceedings began. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in silent witness. Security guards checked credentials at every entrance. Voss entered through a side door, avoiding the media gauntlet outside. His expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame, evidence of weight loss during 2 sleepless weeks. Julian Kraft walked beside him, whispering last-minute advice. The 5-member Judicial Review Panel entered, led by Justice Rebecca Chen from the State Supreme Court. Their faces revealed nothing as they took their positions. "This hearing will determine whether Judge Harlan Voss has violated the Judicial Code of Conduct and Constitution of this state," Justice Chen announced. "These proceedings are not criminal in nature, but will establish whether Judge Voss remains fit to serve on the bench." In this email, Morrison highlighted on the projection screen, Judge Voss specifically instructs Prosecutor Phillips to seek maximum penalties for defendants from what he terms problem neighborhoods, while offering diversion programs for kids who made mistakes from good areas. Voss's former clerk, Alexis Rodriguez, testified about being instructed to schedule certain types of cases strategically. Judge Voss wanted specific prosecutors assigned to cases involving minority defendants, she explained. He called it matching the right attorney to the right case. But it was clearly about ensuring harsher outcomes. Behind closed doors, the governor's legal counsel reviewed options for removing Voss permanently if the investigation confirmed the allegations. They also began considering potential replacements, with an emphasis on candidates with demonstrated commitments to equal justice. As evidence accumulated, Voss's defense strategy crumbled. Former allies abandoned him one by one. Victor Langford, initially called as a character witness, instead provided a sworn statement about Voss's previous comments regarding keeping undesirables away from establishments like the Grand. "He told me during a golf game that strict sentencing was necessary to maintain property values and keep certain elements where they belong," Langford's statement read. "At the time, I didn't challenge these comments. That failure of moral courage is something I now deeply regret. I was doing what needed to be done while the rest of you hide behind political correctness." As the second day of hearings concluded, Voss requested permission to make a statement. Justice Chen granted his request, perhaps hoping for contrition. Voss approached the podium slowly. He began with practiced humility, expressing regret for any misunderstandings and citing his 20 years of dedicated service. But as questioning from the panel intensified, his veneer cracked. A collective gasp rippled through the hearing room. Camera operators zoomed in on Voss's flushed face as he continued his tirade. You want to know the truth? Fine. Some people respond to second chances. Others only understand consequences. I gave each what they needed, and I make no apologies for it. The outburst confirmed every allegation